Last night also brought the revelation about Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito and his upside-down American flag. According to photographic evidence obtained by the New York Times, the inverted flag, a symbol displayed by the Stop the Steal activists who insist the 2020 election was stolen from Donald Trump, that flag was flying outside Justice Alito's home in January of 2021. It was flying there just days after the January 6th attack and while the Supreme Court was considering whether to hear an election case. The court ultimately decided not to take the case, but Sam Alito dissented. He would have taken the case while the Stop the Steal flag was flying in front of his house. To the New York Times, Alito blamed the whole thing on his wife, saying she had raised the upside-down flag in a dispute with a neighbor. Today, Justice Alito went to where else? Fox News, to elaborate further on this dispute, which apparently involved his wife being very upset about a neighbor's anti-Trump lawn sign.
He gave me a little more context, and he said there were some signs out that had vulgarity on them, and Mrs. Alito addressed that to the neighbor. They were on a walk through the neighborhood, and there were words between Mrs. Alito and the man in that house using vulgarity. Justice Alito told me this man used the C word with relation to his wife in front of him. And after that
he called her the C word in front of the judge or the justice?
That's what Justice Alito told me.
Really?
And said that at some point she was obviously very upset, went home, did the flag. He had nothing to do with it, didn't think it was a great idea, but it was there for a short time.
He's lucky that he only got the flag. He's lucky that the justice didn't pop him one in the eye.
He didn't think it was a great idea because it really, really wasn't. Joining me now to discuss this are Elie Mystal, justice correspondent for The Nation, and Mark Joseph Stern, senior writer covering the courts and the law for Slate Magazine. I know you guys have a lot of thoughts on this. Mark, you and Dahlia Lithwick share a byline today in Slate, and I just want to read an excerpt from your assessment of this scandal. The sheer pettiness of these gripes, you write, the fact that these men continue to filter justice through their small, round, grudge-colored glasses is what is breathtaking here. If being an unelected, lifetime-appointed, unbound by the rules jurist means anything at all, should it not mean that you perhaps rise above your grassy suburban neighborhood's feelings wars? Apparently not. Apparently, the life-altering principle of self-soothing your small injuries matters above all things. So, Mark, destroy the court and own the libs. Is that what's happening here?
That is Martha Ann Alito and Sam Alito's MO, as far as we can tell. And frankly, anyone who's been paying attention to Justice Alito's own behavior on the court probably should have seen this coming, including me. I mean, Justice Alito is a tragic and perfect example of what happens when someone's brain has been pickled in the brine of Fox News for years and years on end. He has gone from being a smart, sharp, somewhat partisan conservative to being an all-out MAGA justice who clearly attempts to wield the law to benefit Donald Trump in every way possible and own the libs. And it's quite clear, I think, that he and his wife are as one on this. He and Martha Ann have always been close. She's been known to come to the courtroom for big hearings. She has very strong anti-abortion beliefs. Justice Alito himself attempted to intervene over and over again in 2020. You know, I think it's clear if he disagreed sincerely with his wife putting up a Stop the Steal flag, he would have stopped her or he would have taken it down. It's his house, too. The fact that he didn't shows just how low he's willing to go to express his beliefs. It's not enough to say it from the bench. It's not enough to spew it out in bile in his opinions. He has to put it in his neighbor's face. And when it winds up in the New York Times, he doesn't even deny it. He just makes up an excuse for why he had to do it because his neighbors were mean to them.
Yeah, I mean, Elie, I'm just appalled at the fact that somehow anti-Trump rhetoric is seen as an attack on the Alitos. I mean, that in and of itself explains a value system that's at odds with what we think the justice system is, which is supposed to be impartial, no?
Yeah, look, what I feel really bad for what Alito says happened to him. But to me, as a black man that's on television from time to time, that sounds like Tuesday. All right, the level of hate and vitriol that he says that he felt is what I feel in my daily life every day, right? And you don't see me outside my house with like a Nazi flag because the neighbors were so mean to me today. Like that does not hold water. He put up the flag because he agrees with the message. And to make the point here, he didn't just agree with that message in 2021, right? He didn't just agree with that message 3 years ago. Right now, right now, while this story is happening, and I don't see any vulgar signs in his face right now, he is in the process of letting Trump off for the very insurrection that Alito, we now know for a locked fact, supports, right? His immunity argument with Trump, first of all, he's already delayed it to the point where it's almost impossible to bring Trump to trial in any situation before the election. And we are waiting within the next few weeks to hear Sam Alito most likely dissenting from an opinion that would hold Trump accountable for crimes committed in connection with January 6th. So this flag thing, it's not a throwaway line. It's not like, it is absolutely, it's petty and small and weak. But it's also, as you put it in your opening, Alex, deadly serious, because he's using those grievances to let criminals go free so long as they're the criminals he agrees with.
Yeah, you bring up the immunity case, and that's actively being decided on by the court, Mark. Let's play a little bit of sound from Justice Alito during oral arguments on that case, raising a sort of paranoid grievance. This is what he had to say.
If an incumbent who loses a very close, hotly contested election knows that a real possibility after leaving office is not that the president is going to be able to go off into a peaceful retirement, but that the president may be criminally prosecuted by a bitter political opponent, will that not lead us into a cycle that destabilizes the functioning of our country as a democracy?
I mean, it just sheds new light on that logic, doesn't it, Mark? He's not worried about Trump acting with impunity and being able to assassinate political rivals. He's worried about Trump being held accountable if he, I don't know, engages in election subversion.
Right. To Alito, the greatest threat to democracy is that the man who poses the single biggest peril to it might actually face a trial and a jury of his peers over it. Alex, I was in the courtroom for that argument. It takes a lot to surprise me. I nearly fell out of my chair when Justice Alito made that statement. It was stunning to hear. And I just want to reiterate, I don't think that the Sam Alito of 10 or 15 years ago would have said something like that. Alito used to be really good at kind of playing up some point of agreement with other conservatives so he could build a coalition. He was really good at asking questions that would get Justice Anthony Kennedy on his side, for instance, sometimes Chief Justice John Roberts. He's lost that ability, and now he seems to use oral arguments as this kind of airing of the grievances, this opportunity for him to speak out to the public and to his peers and to say, I'm disgusted by what President Trump is going through, in essence, and to put himself there like the congressman in front of the courthouse in New York City as a staunch defender of Donald Trump himself. And I'll just add, I think there's maybe a little silver lining here, which is that I do think he is repelling some of his conservative colleagues with this stuff. I think that justices like Amy Coney Barrett and even Brett Kavanaugh are starting to be really sort of discomforted, if not disturbed, by this behavior. And we're seeing it in some of these opinions, like the one that came out yesterday. Justice Barrett and Justice Kavanaugh joined this opinion that really kind of criticized harshly Justice Alito's dissent, said Justice Alito went about it the wrong way, used the wrong history, used the wrong methodology. It seems like they might be sending a message to him, buddy, you got to rein it in, or we're not going to join your opinions. We won't be on your side.
Buddy, you got to stop flying the Stop the Steal flags in front of your house while you're taking up questions about January 6th. Ellie, Alito is not the only one that has serious ethics complaints swirling around him. Clarence Thomas is the other. And I just kind of wonder whether you think the two embolden each other and whether what of John Roberts? Is there any hope that the Supreme Court and the leader of the Supreme Court, the Chief Justice, decides to do anything about this?
Samuel Alito and Clarence Thomas and John Roberts and all of the rest of them are emboldened by the complete feckless job Democrats in Congress have done to rein them in. All right? They're emboldened not by each other, but by Dick Durbin. Okay, the fact that we are still in 2024 and we do not have an ethics bill, not the ridiculousness that the Supreme Court said it was going to self-police when clearly they cannot police themselves. The fact that we do not have a congressional ethics bill with real teeth and real penalties for these people when they are revealed to be as corrupt as we all know them to be is a travesty. As long as, look, you never are going to get anything with the Republicans, Mike Johnson and Matt Gaetz and all the Trump cosplayers. They're all going to do their thing. But the fact that the Democrats cannot speak with one clear, coherent voice on what needs to be done in terms of this court, in terms of ethics, in terms of reform, in terms of limiting their power, not only in terms of limiting their lifetime power, but literally jurisdiction stripping and limiting what cases they can decide. The fact that the Democrats are nowhere on stopping these people is what emboldens these people. Alito acts the way he acts because he knows nothing is going to happen to him.
You talk about congressional Democrats, congressional Republicans are united on the cause of judicial ethics. They are worried about Judge Juan Merchan in New York. This is all happening in real time. This hypocrisy is unfolding before our very eyes. Elie Mystal and Mark Joseph Stern, thank you guys both for spending a little time this Friday night. I appreciate it.